Hey everybody, this is John from Pioneer Nexus MTGO coming at you with another deck overview, this time covering Mono Black Midrange. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and don't forget to check out other videos of the decks we've covered. So Mono Black Midrange is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different decks. There has been a Mono Black Devotion deck that's been running around for quite some time with things like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, along with Rakdos powering out these very powerful Grey Merchant kind of kill you lines. There's also been a printing of a lot of very powerful mono black things into both the standard and Pioneer formats of late. Most notably, this was a deck that got things banned in the standard format. Meat Hook Massacre got banned because the deck was basically too powerful, and a lot of standard kind of revolved around these mono black-esque piles that were like Grixis flavored or Rakdos flavored or all these different things. Basically, it's a deck that's been weakened in standard and has a lot of the same pieces in the Pioneer format. So it's kind of all come into this amalgamation of a Rakdos midrange-esque midrange deck with a little bit less emphasis on obviously having a little bit less weaker spells because you're not playing the red splash, but you get a little bit of a cleaner mana base, a little bit more in the utility land department, and you get to play the very powerful card Invoke Despair with very little downside. The key of the deck, any midrange deck really in the format that succeeds that is black based, tends to be Thoughtseize and Fatal Push. Obviously the two of the best cards in the format. Fatal Push, very good, being able to kill almost anything of relevance in the format. And with things like Field of Ruin in the deck, you are sometimes able to trigger Revolt, although not as cleanly as something as Rakdos Sacrifice. Thoughtseize, obviously putting the opponent on, disrupting their plans and giving you some idea of how to play your game plan. And then Bloodchief's Thirst is kind of another catch-all, scalable removal spell in the mid-game. Power Word Kill, obviously this kills most things in the format. Does not kill, notably, things like Mayhem Devil and such. There are also sometimes some angels out of the control deck sideboards that you might need to kill, but oftentimes this and Go for the Throat or Heartless Act are the cards you're going to see in this kind of a slot. As far as recent printings, Misery's Shadow is a scalable 2/2 creature with upside. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead. Very relevant against things like Arclight Phoenix, things out of the Greasefane deck, etc. Also relevant against mono green when you kill something like Cavalier of Thorns or Old Growth Troll. Gifted Reborn, Gifted Etherborn, nice little 2/3 for 2 black mana. Good in the aggressive matchups, trades up with most creatures. Murderous Rider is kind of a split card, much like Bone Crusher Giant or the whatchamacallit, Lovestruck Beast. This allows you to play Swift End, which is a removal spell that can kill anything at the cost of losing 2 life and 3 mana. And on the other side, you get a 2/3 lifelinker that when it dies, goes to the bottom of your library. So, removal spell, a little bit of lifelink, quite nice in a utility creature. Graveyard Trespasser, kind of slices it, dices it, does it all. Helps to race against the aggressive decks. Helps to keep Graveyard in check for things like Arclight Phoenix and Greasefang. Quite a nice card overall, and also has Ward. Ward discard a card, which makes it a little bit difficult to kill unless your opponent's packing Edict effects. And Liliana of the Veil, another recent printing from Dominaria United, forces each player to discard cards, edicts your opponent's creatures, or potentially its ultimate makes them lose half their permanents. Sheoldred, yet another card from Dominaria United. Shocker. Whenever you draw a card, you gain some life. When your opponent draws cards, they lose 2 life in a 4/5 Death Touch body. Not bad overall. But the main draw to the deck is Invoke Despair, which is a card you could potentially play in something like Rakdos, but the mana requirements are quite stringent with quad black. Target player sacrifices a creature. They lose 2 life, you draw a card. Then repeat this process for an enchantment and a planeswalker. This is quite nice into something like mono green, where, say, if you can fire this off on turn 5, obviously, sometimes you can get like an elf, a Karn, and a Wolf Willowhaven. Also, other decks have enchantments that sometimes black can't answer easily. You know, the Fires of Invention decks sometimes getting, say, a Bone Crusher, Giant Fires of Invention, dealing with your opponent's, I don't even know, maybe a Luca if they're playing like a some type of Transmogrify deck. You know, this is quite a very powerful card and is kind of your over-the-top late-game card, and the main reason to play the Mono Black Midrange deck over something like Rakdos, which is generally recognized as the best midrange deck in the format. Land base, much like the Rakdos deck, you do get to play a lot of utility lands, but you get to play even more so. You get to play Castle Lockdwing as a way to draw additional cards, Hive of the Eye Tyrant as your land creature land of choice, Field of Ruin to disrupt things like Thespian Stage Combo or Nykthos, and obviously Urborg, turn everything into swamps, and then Takenuma as a way to rebuy creatures and planeswalkers. Sideboard options, obviously being mono black, you're a little bit limited, but you do still have some options. Duress to kind of pair with your Thoughtseizes against mid-range control and combo. Ray of Enfeeblement, very good against white-based creatures, especially humans, and Greasefang being another instant speed way to deal with annoying things like Greasefang. Epic Downfall, very good in the mono-green matchup, being able to exile their key creatures. Noxious Grasp, very similarly, very good in the mono-green, also good against humans. Reckoner Bankbuster is a powerful artifact in kind of the grindy matchups, giving you a card draw and another threat. Extinction Event when you need sweepers against creature decks, whether it be against heroic, humans, spirits, angels, etc. Meathook Massacre, also kind of another go-over-the-top creature-based thing against creature decks, and is also very good in the sacrifice matchups, helping you to offset the Cat Oven life loss. This version, very similar to the version we just looked at, except it's not playing Misery Shadow. Instead, you're playing things like Tenacious Underdog, which is a resilient threat that in the mid-game can accrue you some card advantage at the cost of some life while also pressuring your opponent with some mana. Sign in Blood is both a way to potentially kill your opponent at a low life total or draw yourself some cards. And then the rest of the main deck we've already kind of covered. Land base is very similar, although this one's running 25 lands instead of the 24 and 1 copy of Agadeem's Awakening. Sideboard, you're still going to see a lot of the same options, but going to see some different sweepers. Witch's Vengeance, a little bit more efficient into creatures such as humans, which can be important with things like Thalia, taxing your mana, at the cost of not being quite as good a sweeper as Extinction Event against things like angels, not always being able to kill angels. Leyline of the Void, primarily here for any type of Arc Light or Greasefang shenanigans. Sorin the Mirthless, a kind of a grindy planeswalker. And Sky Sovereign as just a nice way in the mid-range matchups or creature-based matchups. And one card I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen in some of these lists is Kalidas. Obviously, it's very good in the creature-based matchups, and that is certainly something else you could run. But Sky Sovereign is certainly an excellent card into those matchups as well. This version, a little bit different. You're running Shambling Ast as a 1-drop. This can either be a removal spell for your opponent's early creatures, such as their elves, while also being a way to kind of ramp yourself a little bit if it happens to die, by creating a treasure token, and then still running the same disruption package. We're still running Misery Shadow. This one's running a little bit heavier on the 2-drops. It's running Deadly Dispute as a way to pair with the Shambling Ast, as a way to get a little bit of card advantage and a little bit of additional mileage out of your Shambling Ghasts. We do see a one of Kalidas that I kind of talked about at the very end of the last deck as a nice way to counter creature decks in addition to all the other stuff you got going on. And as we're clearly seeing, one of the big reasons to run this deck is Invoke Despair, although it is a little light on mana overall, although I guess with Shambling Ghast and Deadly Dispute, creating treasure tokens are not as in on lands, but I don't know that I would like to be spending time spinning my tires trying to draw cards to hit my land drops. I think I'd rather just hit my land drops naturally and be able to cast my spells on curve if I were a mid-range deck. Sideboard, nothing terribly exciting here, although we are seeing some other options. Infernal Grasp as yet another kind of catch-all answer. This one literally does destroy every creature. Doesn't have the restrictions of things like Power Word Kill, Heartless Act, or Go for the Throat, but does have the downside of you lose 2 life. Unlicensed Hearse, get another graveyard hate piece you can run in addition to Leyline of the Void. Necromentia for those decks with annoying combo pieces like Fires of Invention, Lotus Field combo, etc. Go Blank, quite nice against the mid-range and combo deck, or mid-range control and combo decks, as a nice way to gain a little bit of card advantage terms of forcing your opponent to discard some things and also attacking the graveyard at the same time. As I've said, Rakdos is kind of the obvious choice for the best mid-range deck in the format. I suspect Mono Black has very similar matchups across the board, with maybe having a little bit better of a matchup against things like Rakdos and such because of Invoke Despair specifically, just kind of being this over-the-top way to kind of close out the mid-range matchups. There's not a lot of information out there on the deck, honestly. I've watched a couple different videos of some people playing the decks, and I've obviously seen quite a bit of it across the standard format. But like I said, it's kind of an amalgamation of the old Mono Black Devotion with Grey Merchant of Asphodel removed from the deck just because there's better cards now. You get to play a little bit lower the curve, and Invoke Despair is just as powerful in some ways as Grey Merchant of Asphodel without being as individually a weak card if you don't have a board presence. But overall, I think the main draw to this version over something like Rakdos is Invoke Despair if you kind of want to go over the top card in a lot of matchups. And overall, get to play a little tiny bit cleaner of a mana base, a little bit more utility with like 4 copies of Castle Lockwing as a way to draw cards. Obviously, I don't think this deck is better than Rakdos, but there are certain matchups that might be better, like the mid-range matchups. Control matchups are probably roughly the same. The creature matchups are probably roughly about the same. But, you know, you don't get access to the red cards like Bone Crusher Giant. You don't get access to things like don't get access to things like Chandra, etc. So you do lose out on some of the red cards at the expense of a slightly cleaner mana base and a slightly more over-the-top card. So if that's something you're interested in and you're tired of maybe playing Rakdos, maybe this is a deck you could give a spin. And I'm not quite sure on the budget on it. It might be slightly cheaper because of the mana base than something like Rakdos, but I wouldn't necessarily count on there being a huge difference in price. But maybe budget is also another reason to play Mono Black a little bit. Invoke Despair, very powerful card, could be a reason to draw to this deck. And overall, it is another mid-range option in the format. If you do like, once again, if you do like these kind of deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below. And maybe let me know what deck you'd like to see us cover next.